Welcome, everybody. My name is Sarah Sims, and I'm the Assistant Director of Professional Development for the Brown School here at Washington University in St. Louis. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Open Classroom. Open Classroom is the Brown School's virtual and free professional development series. Beyond this webinar series, we are also the largest provider of continuing education units in our region. So if you're looking for CEUs, or if you just want some deeper learning opportunities, I invite you to check out our website. It is brownschool.woostle.edu/professional-development. I'll be dropping that in the chat shortly. We offer workshops year-round on nearly a weekly basis, so we would love to see you for one of those. Before we get started with today's programming, I just have two quick housekeeping items. First, as you probably already noticed, we are in a Zoom webinar format, which means that we can't see or hear you, but we have turned on the chat and we welcome your comments and especially your questions. We will have time to address some of the questions at the end. So whenever you have a question, drop that in the chat and then we'll read off as many as we can at the end. The second thing, I just want to remind folks, we are recording today's session and it will be posted on our Open Classroom page as well as YouTube, and I'll drop links to that in the chat as soon as I'm finished. So now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Sarah Lucan, who's the Assistant Director of Admissions and Recruitment here at the Brown School, who's going to introduce our speaker and program for today. Sarah?
Thank you, Sarah. And welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. A special welcome to prospective Brown School students. We're very glad you're here. I'm thrilled to welcome everyone to the fourth installment of our Curriculum Showcase series on Open Classroom, and would like to thank Sarah Sims and the Brown School Professional Development team for partnering with admissions to bring this great series to our prospective students and the community. We hope that what you gain from this Open Classroom is a little more knowledge about the topic being discussed, and for prospective students, a sense of what you can expect in the classroom with the renowned faculty members who are being featured in this series. Today's session specifically offers a sample of the type of issues addressed by our social work related curriculum, particularly the Sexual Health and Education Specialization in the Master of Social Work program. I am pleased to introduce today's speaker. Susan Stiritz is a professor of practice and chair of the Sexual Health and Education Specialization. The specialization is taught by faculty members of the Sexuality, Health, and Gender, or SHAG Center, which was established at the Brown School to address critical gaps in sexuality research, education, and training. Susan herself has been conducting sex research and teaching sexuality courses for more than 20 years. She designs and teaches Brown School courses to help students fulfill the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists, or ASECT, certification requirements, and her research centers on holistic sexuality education and developmental sexuality. Stiritz has published papers in various peer-reviewed journals, including the American Journal of Sexuality Education. Previously, she founded and ran a Model Cities Daycare Center, worked as Director of Education and Training at the St. Louis Family Planning Council. She served as President of ASECT from 2018 to 2020, and served many years on the Planned Parenthood of St. Louis Board of Directors. She is also a certified sexuality educator and a certified sexuality education supervisor, and is a member of the St. Louis Psychoanalytic Institute faculty. In 2002, Stiritz was named a Washington University Distinguished Alumna, and in 2013, she was honored as the ASECT Sexuality Educator of the Year. Susan has served as a member of Washington University's LGBT Advisory Board and was awarded Hollabaugh Honors for service to and advocacy for the LGBTQ community in 2014. With that, I will turn it over to Susan for our presentation today, Sex Chatting, Expanding Sexual Self-Efficacy. Susan.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for such a nice introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. As you heard, I'm Susan Stiritz. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And as you know, I chair the Specialization in Sexual Health and Education. Excuse me, I kind of have allergies here. I acknowledge that Washington University is located on the traditional lands of the Illini, Osage, and Missouri nations, that they were removed unjustly, and that Washington University's community is the beneficiary of their stewardship. I honor Indigenous heritage and regret the connection between European denigration of both the status of native land and female sexuality, apparent in the words European settlers used to justify their exploitation of native lands as undiscovered virgin land available for the taking. Thanks to the Brown School's professional development team for inviting me to speak with you about sexual self-efficacy. Sexual health and education is a critical subspecialty in social work, slowly regaining attention. I say regaining because during the Hull House days of social work from 1889 to 1935, Jane Addams and her collaborators addressed sexuality in their community education classes. A century of silence about sexuality has prevailed in social work since Addams' death and subsequent professionalization of social work. Jane Addams, recognized as America's founder of social work, made sexuality a significant theme in her life and work. Although applying today's sexual identity labels to Addams is controversial, in 2008, the Chicago LGBT Hall of Fame inducted her into their pantheon of queer notables. I find in my classes, actually at the whole Brown School, that nobody seems to know that Jane Addams was a lesbian. I was inspired to develop sex chatting, partly from studying Jane Addams. I admire her communication models, her teaching pacifism, and centering of love and mutuality on micro, meso, and macro levels. Her fostering community among immigrants from around the world at Hull House convinces me that people have more similarities than differences, and when motivated, can curb reactivity to ticklish topics in the interest of collaborating synergistically. The cosmopolitanism Addams modeled and expected from Hull House diverse families created a nonviolent culture with members seeking common ground and peaceful coexistence. This needs to be imitated. She was honored with the first Nobel Peace Prize awarded to an American woman. And certainly combatants waging sex wars today could benefit from studying Addams' theories of peaceful change and strategies for nonviolent living. Sex chatting, which intentionally aligns with Addams' philosophies, in my humble opinion, demonstrates the validity of her theories and strategies in action. This painting reflects Addams' horror of war. It's the apotheosis of war from 1871 from the Russian painter Vasily Vereshchagin. Addams valued the fact that community and commitment to human survival evolved in humans millions of years before the practice of war did. Because wars between human groups emerged relatively recently, only 20,000 years ago, Addams theorized that humans' proclivity to wage them could be extinguished, like she thought we had eliminated slavery. She believed that human solidarity, kindness, and protection, which evolved millions of years earlier, would win out in the end over human domination and mass destruction of life. And this hope fueled her work. What is self-efficacy? Gaining self-efficacy, according to its author, Albert Bandura, is not like successfully pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. Rather, it is more like mountain climbing, in which partners help each other reach the summit and make the climb safer by climbing together. Bandura doesn't mention relational theory in his books and articles, but his theories also presume the advantage of group efficacy to self-efficacy. Relational cultural theories' 8 core principles align with what Bandura claims are sources of self-efficacy. Further, Duncan and Miller's client's theory of change model supports sex chatting with its explanations of how collaborative conversations are themselves healing. RTC's principles stress the power of mutuality to heal. And I'm going to read them out loud because I know that not everyone today is able to read them. So 1, people grow through and toward relationship through their lives. 2, movement toward mutuality rather than movement toward separation characterizes mature functioning. 3, relational differentiation and elaboration characterize growth. 4, mutual empathy and mutual empowerment are at the core of growth fostering relationships. 5, in growth fostering relationships, all people contribute and grow or benefit. Development is not a one-way street. 6, therapy relationships are characterized by a special kind of mutuality. 7, mutual empathy is the vehicle for change in therapy. And 8, real engagement and therapeutic authenticity are necessary for the development of mutual empathy. So sex chatting is a practice built on social justice and RCT's principles. And these principles describe the power of mutuality to foster not only growth, development, and healing, but also good sex. Sex chatting is sexual self-efficacy training. It is built on the 4 sources of self-efficacy Bandura describes. So this chart shows how this model works. So at the top, we have these 4 sources. 1, peer modeling that makes wannabes think, if she can do that, so can I. 2, practice. No one got to be a good lover just thinking about sex. 3, expert coaching teaches contraceptive skills, pleasure skills, health protection skills, communication and relationship skills. And 4, enjoying the learning process comes with finally getting the sex ed people want taught in relational ways. The content of sex efficacy training or sex chatting comes from exploring the 4 domains that emerged from my grounded theory of sexual health. I conducted research in 2007 when I was in research methods at the Brown School with undergraduate participants who determined that all things necessary for good sex fall into these 4 categories: power, pleasure, protection, and intimacy. The sexual self-efficacy scale is the instrument we developed for our women's studies students to use to measure their sexual self-efficacy through determining abilities in each of the 4 domains. Sex chatting is a sexual health social work intervention I've been working on since I took research methods. Teaching sexuality courses for women's studies classes, I was distressed by students' stories of victimization, sexism, sexual assault, and diminishment on campus. Together, we conducted participatory action research into what would constitute good sex on campus. The components of good sex students found to be essential fell into those 4 domains: power, pleasure, protection, and intimacy. Students would have to feel as important and powerful as their partners, have exceptional pleasure, feel safe, and share closeness if they were to have sex they thought was worth having. We next developed a sexual self-efficacy scale, which you see in front of you, to measure what degree these conditions were present in the sex a person was having. We gained IRB approval and validated the instrument, and now use this scale to measure the effectiveness of various sex education interventions we designed to improve sexual interactions and experiences in these 4 domains. According to Bandura, self-efficacy refers to an individual's belief in his or her capacity to execute behaviors necessary to produce specific performance attainments within particular domain. Self-efficacy reflects confidence in the ability to exert control over one's own motivation, behavior, and social environment. These are the scoring sheets that we use with a sexual self-efficacy scale. Each question on the scale assesses abilities in one of the 4 domains. Each of the 4 scores is a percentage. The participant who took this test, whose results I have graphed, scored a 75% in intimacy, a 50% in pleasure, an 80% in protection, and 80% in power. It's fun to use this as pre-post evaluations to see how before and after a course you have grown in sexual self-efficacy. Sex chatting aims to increase efficacy in the domains. Facilitating this growth, the coach should avoid using the adult instructing voice. Dominating and shaming undermine self-efficacy. Thinking of sexual history teaching as sex chatting puts everyone on the same storytelling level, increasing knowledge, comfort, and pleasure fairly. Rapport and alliance building strategies from cultural sensitivity models empower, revivify, and energize sex chatting. So what is sexual self-efficacy? Sexual self-efficacy is confidence that I can have the sexual experiences I want the next time I engage sexually. Here, a student's self-portraits before and after learning to sex chat illustrate what gaining sexual self-efficacy looks like. The student drew them to express her growth during the semester of sex chatting. Before learning this skill to speak authentically, she feels embedded in chaos, depression, constriction, shame, and despair. Afterwards, she stands tall, powerful, energetic, joyful, and alive. She feels like a tree. You can see her branches sprouting up. And also like fire. You see a fire, the flames leaping up, and also a cloud with nurturing rain pouring off of her. Sex chatting has been used successfully with queer folks, straight folks, men, women, non-binary, able, disabled, old, young, and variously raced participants. I hope today's presentation and discussion will motivate you to prioritize supporting clients, friends, family members, and your own sexual self-efficacy. Whatever kind of social work you practice as a professional, a family member, a community member, or a friend, I hope this presentation can encourage you to comfortably discuss how wellness, enjoyment, and relationships can be impacted by learning to sex chat. Talking about sex without the shame we have learned to associate with what we do sexually. The goal of this session is to discuss personal sex education that is holistic, developmental, inclusive, fact-based, fair, and a few tools to use as interventions. So by the end, these are our objectives. By the end of this session, attendees will be able to identify personal obstacles to discussing sex, define sexual self-efficacy in its four domains, power, pleasure, protection, and intimacy, discuss the erotic as a theory of human passion, asexual and sexual, describe 4 sources of sexual self-efficacy, vicarious success from watching peers, practicing skills observed, expert coaching, and pleasure while learning, and describe at least 8 interventions to use to expand sexual self-efficacy. Also, to report 1 intention to lessen judgment, to undermine shaming, to resist androcentric values, to foster compassion in our sexuality educating. So why is sex chatting to expand sexual self-efficacy important? Because sex is political as well as personal. Because sexual behavior, I have to move my thing here, undermines political behavior. We need to scrutinize whether sexual norms support or undermine democratic values and processes. Sex chatting demystifies sex and opens it up for negotiation and renegotiation, for pleasure and for increased health and personal freedom. Although I have not found evidence of Audre Lorde, who's my favorite sexuality theorist, engaging with Jane Addams' work, their similarities help us see a history of sexual oppression and resistance to hegemonic sexuality in America. Both Jane Addams and Lorde spoke of the erotic as a force of connection, creative energy, a source of knowledge, and as fueling empowerment in people and groups. Both recognize the power of the erotic to shape language, history, dancing, loving, play work, lives, how acutely and fully we can feel in doing. Lorde advocated resistance to what kills feeling. That, to her, is the path to authentic living. Both warned readers that the meaning of the erotic has been eroded in contemporary times to align more closely with simply physical sensation, leaving out the deep feeling they valued as critical to authenticity. Addams and Lorde both complained the meaning of sex had flattened and cheapened, where once it carried feelings of pride, implications for diversity and transcendence over mediocrity, it now is connected to commercialized sex and aligns with commodification. Both lesbians, Adams and Lord, described how standardizing sexuality standardized thought and feeling, deflated mysteries and wonders of creation in the process. Trivialized sex numbs people, taming them instead of enlivening them. Making people docile renders them easier to exploit and easier to finally erase. As Foucault has taught, how we have sex provides a template for how we relate with others in general. So how we have sex matters beyond the personal. The personal is the political. So this is how we typically have sex in the US, supposedly. Sex chatting can provide critical consciousness. It is a form of consciousness raising. The coital imperative that we see here, while ensuring het men get the stimulation they want, can block pleasure, including orgasms, of others. Only 20% of people who need clitoral stimulation to orgasm can do so through penetrative experience alone. Conventional cis heterosexual scripts teach that women belong on the bottom and are not as entitled to pleasure as men. The result is that women who have sex with men experience 40% fewer orgasms than men and lower paychecks too. Foucault explained heterosex biopower is a form of domination. People who do not ask for the sexual pleasure they want because they do not feel entitled to it tend to not ask for raises or other perks either. The pay gap follows the orgasm gap. Teachers, social workers, and other health professionals can help people across the life course negotiate for sex gender equity. We can be effective helping clients develop optimal sexuality for themselves and optimal social justice in our sexual cultures. So the biggest obstacles to sex chatting is toxic sexual shame. From colonial times, sex, particularly women's sexuality, has been controlled by laws that shamed and suppressed. Current Western understandings about sex and sexuality limit erotic experience, stigmatize people outside sex gender binaries, and support discriminatory and non-consensual practices. These understandings have been passed on through historical intergenerational trauma imposed by colonialism and globalization. They're inextricably linked to white supremacy, patriarchal oppression, capitalism, ableism, homophobia, transphobia, and other forms of marginalization, where certain lives, bodies, and relations are valued far more highly than others. Shame stops counselors, therapists, doctors, teachers, and parents from sex chatting. Most caring professions fail to address patients' sexual health because they feel uncomfortable or ill-prepared to deal with sexuality issues. Silence projects the shaming of parents, teachers, church, friends, and strangers we've already experienced, and it projects them onto the people we are trying to help. Only 29% of sexual health professionals query patients about sexual satisfaction. 98% of women who come to appointments with a sexual question they hope a professional will answer. One international study of over 27,000 male and female patients showed that more than half had at least one sexual problem or concern, but only 19% had either sought medical care or been asked about sexual health in the last 3 years. From the 17th century on, masturbation has been falsely blamed for everything from small breasts to paralysis and even the end of the human race. Dr. Ravi Paris wrote in 1828, "Masturbation is one of the scourges which secretly attacks and destroys humanity. It is the destroyer of civilizations." It was also thought to make you mad and depressed after doctors noted all the participants in mental institutions compulsively masturbated. So this is a picture of instruments that the children were put to bed with to keep them from masturbating. They're unbelievable, unbelievably cruel. And then down in the right-hand corner is something called I'm trying to think what it was called. Well, it's a changing instrument that keeps the child from touching his genital. So our sex negativity has not really disappeared, that's for sure. Today, parents use it's a snoofy bee to prevent babies from teaching their genitals as well as dirty diapers. Today, physicians affirm that masturbation is healthy and that sexual intercourse at 15, 16, or 17 is normative. They recognize that young people, as Bandura's self-efficacy theory explains, need to practice sex as part of their development of sexual unfolding. Abstinence-only sex education continues the snoofy bee strategy through young adulthood, infantilizing young people, preventing adolescent unfolding of sexual pleasure, limits sexual autonomy that teaches acceptance of being under the control of adults who supposedly know what is good for them. That is called adultism. New research indicates humans have sensitive periods for learning sexual competencies. Adolescence is one of these. Becoming frameworks of pubertal maturation need to consider the pubertal brain. That kind of maturation is necessary for romantic and reproductive success in adulthood. So being forced to conform to rigid gender and sexuality scripts frustrates. Horizontal aggression, which is attacking your peers rather than the dominator who you're really angry at. And it's a common response under conditions of oppression. When adults dominate, youth perpetrate in greater numbers against peers. Further, foregoing learning knowledge, skills, and attitudes that will lead to sexual comfort and confidence starts with inadequate mentorship and education. It's not surprising to me that 80% of cis-het female students fake orgasms on our university campus, and 50% can't climax with a cis-het male partner. And more than 50% of those identifying as male think it is okay to pressure others to go further than they want to go sexually. Many people feel sexually inhibited by the emptiness of sex educations they have experienced. A recent study finds that 90% of Americans feel unprepared for sexual relationships they have. Feeling ashamed by all they don't know, they are afraid to ask questions to fill their knowledge gaps. They worry about being sexual imposters and fake sexual response or forced sexual compliance during sexual interactions. Incels, for instance, feel entitled to force women to have sex with them, and 1 in 5 campus men admit to doing the same thing. Silence surrounding the erotic is not only shaming, but dangerous. The New York Times recently reported that college students have no idea how to talk about sex. And studies show that 46% of Generation Z identify outside one of the binaries. So certainly we need to be talking about gender and sex to understand who each of us is. 90% of people say their sex education has not prepared them to feel confident about best practices and having good sex. And we need to talk with young people now more than ever. The truth is that sexuality is as individual as snowflakes or fingerprints. And when consensual and reasonably safe, is never wrong or weird, just unique. Sex chatting helps us appreciate our uniqueness. Sexuality is a healthy and normal part of the human experience. Not wanting sex or not experiencing sexual attraction or arousal are also normal and healthy. These experiences exist along a fluid continuum of sexuality that can change over a person's lifetime. So the goal of today is to foster erotic from womb to womb by sex chatting throughout the life course. Or the goal of sex chatting is that humans, and here are some of the objectives of teaching the erotic, which is Audre Lorde's concept. Humans are erotic animals across their lives, and support helps. Coercion hurts. Neuroplasticity enables humans to achieve great diversity among themselves. Their lives encompass a wide range of sexual and asexual experiences. Sexual expression is a potential and can be minimized or optimized by our cultural scripts and personal experiences. and sex-gender relationship diversity is greater than our societies have acknowledged. From asexuality to genital pleasuring to power and sensation play, to romantic and aromantic experiences, to monogamy, singledom, to polyamory, erotic desire and expression, there are infinite forms of sexuality and infinite sexualities. The erotic is adaptive, promotes various forms of human connection and bonding, and offers a wide range of pleasures and satisfaction. Move this out of the way. Expressing sex-gender development is normative, and sexual self-efficacy practices accelerate wanted growth. Sexuality can also be co-opted through domination and be the site of oppression and exploitation. Elements of sex chatting include practice, as we said, practice and self-reflection, sex coaching, positive feelings and pleasure, and personal sexual histories. For the past 20 years, I've been developing and teaching transformative sexuality for university undergraduates and graduate social work students. I'm an ASEC certified sexuality educator and supervisor, and my experience as president of ASEC has made me so committed to the development and leadership of ASEC educators. At the Brown School, students can prepare for ASEC certification along with participating in the specialization. So sex chat tools used for creating new personal stories include really many social work interventions. We start with the PLISSIT model. We already looked at the sexual self-efficacy scale. We use what you all know about from social work: genograms, sexual timelines, relational dialogues, ACE and resilience inventories, Ecomaps, ORID sequences, shame inventories, and lots of toys: model stickers, sex toys, books, vulva puppets, anatomical dolls, and games. So these are prompts for sex chatting that I created, or actually all of us created, that have been working on in the specialization. And we have them so that you can have a backup for supporting your critical consciousness, which fosters sexual self-efficacy. As social workers committed to social justice as part of our professional code of ethics, we advocate bringing an equity lens intentionally into our sex chatting. Requirements for equity include consent, built on dialogue and negotiation. Sex chatting is welcomed conversation about sexual health. It reduces shame, normalizes and affirms. It uses questionnaires, genograms, timelines, and Ecomaps as props for these discussions. So the PLISSIT model is a tool used to fit different levels of discourse and types of talking to individuals, clients, and needs. It's a dialogue. So the PLISSIT model has 4 levels of conversation. First is giving permission, getting permission from the client, saying, we consider sexual health an important part of your total health. Is it okay with you if we have those discussions today? The next thing we do, if they say yes, I've never had anybody say no, actually. I think people are desperate to talk about sex. The next level of discourse is limited information. We don't really want to flood people with information that they don't want. And so we just say a few things. And if they follow that up with questions, we'll go ahead and give specific suggestions. And finally, if some serious problems emerge in our conversations, we'll make referrals for intensive therapy. This is our PLISSIT brochure, and it covers the history, social context, rationale for, and directions on how to use the PLISSIT model. And then this is an example of giving limited information. The limited information given here is an example. It discusses female sexual anatomy and distinguishes between reproductive anatomy and anatomy of arousal. I'm sure you all recognize the reproductive organs over here on the left, but I don't know how many of you know what our anatomy of arousal looks like, our clitoral system. In male anatomy, reproduction and arousal involve simultaneous functioning. Sperm ejaculation and climax are usually simultaneous. In female anatomy, orgasm is separate from reproductive functioning, however. Female arousal occurs outside of what is necessary for reproduction, so penetration is not necessarily tied to female pleasure. The human sexual response is a gendered one. Stimulation is experienced differently for those with penises than for those with vulvas. This may account for males to experience spontaneous desire, being horny, more often than females do, who more often experience responsive desire. For those of you who went to Emily Nagoski's talk, this is some of her theory. Because in our culture, hegemonic desire is spontaneous, more a male pattern, cis women's responsive desire is often discounted as inferior. Women are so often called frigid or something like that, negative, when actually they're just not given the stimulation they need to get as horny as people who have desire to begin with, spontaneous desire. Nagoski advises don't have sex only when you are experiencing spontaneous desire. Fool around sexually, enjoying the pleasure, and have orgasms brought about by adequate attention to the clitoris. Manual stimulation or a vibrator may be necessary for a climax for most women. Having good sex education frees you from feeling that it's hard to talk about sex because knowledge is power. To take a close, To take a closer look at the clitoral truth of female sexuality, these are the parts of the clitoris that we have. And in the very sort of those big sacs are the clitoral lobes that must be filled, and that's what causes female erection. And it really our sexual response works very similar to the penis, but it just is shaped in the body differently, so it needs different kinds of stimulation. For that reason, another specific suggestion would offer a client, have you used sex toys? And these are some vibrators, really probably the best tools for overcoming anorgasmia, never having had an orgasm before, or having a hard time having one. And some of the other intervention would include masturbation training, exploration with partners, bibliotherapy, pornography, erotica, joining a sect, taking training. Masturbation is actually good for you. It is relaxing. It teaches you about your body. It brings pleasure. It's beneficial to your health. It lowers your blood pressure, reduces number of headaches, and increases energy. And it's the safest form of sex. It's very unlikely you'll get an STD unless you use a sex toy that hasn't been washed. So inclusive, socially equitable sex optimizes wanted pleasure for everyone and does not judge better ways to have sex apart from each person's preferences. Our sexual preferences and responses are unique. There's not one right way to have sex or to orgasm. Sex chatting is essential to negotiating what will be what Barry McCarthy calls good enough sex for the partners having sex together. What works best for you? Have you and your partner had this conversation? Or do you continue to follow hegemonic scripts, what we see in the movies, and how we talk about sex and sex curricula we don't really want to have, or that we see in parents talk with their children? So another specific suggestion is using the Ecomap, and this is the Ecomap brochure that we have. So the idea is to measure the power of your relationships by the energy they give you. So this is, if you could imagine that the large circle in the center is you, and around that circle are your most important activities and people. And you would connect your resources with that large center in the circle with the symbols that you see on the side. And what you want to find out is, let me move this, is how full you are with erotic energy or how depleted you are. So this is Janet Mock's Ecomap that we did when we were reading her novel. And this is what, excuse me, her erotic sources look like after she transitioned and became the woman that she always knew she was, but had not been treated as. And we should see that she has a lot of mutual, strong relationships now, but still some one-sided relationships with people who are not treating her transition fairly, and some stressful relationships and some distant relationships also. So you can assess your total inflow and outflow using the Ecomap. Are you giving of yourself too much and left feeling empty, or how can you balance your erotic energy better? So here are some quotes from Audre Lorde, etc. And I especially like how she says, always remember you have within you the strength, the patience, and the passion to reach for the stars to change the world. Excuse me, that's Harriet Tubman's. But we see the erotic as a life force that feeds all of our connections, creativity, and hope for the future. So another specific suggestion is a sexual timeline. This can help you not let your life just happen. Let's see. It's important to examine your life's patterns for your strengths and challenges, what experiences, learning, trauma, transformations you have had, and know your strengths and focus on them, not on your deficits. It's important when you use this to then determine to find your people, your community, your sense of belonging. And choose to spend more time with people who expand your positivity, your sense of self, your store of the erotic. So these are directions on how to use the timeline. And so we'll make these brochures available to you. Sex chatting can be a form of consciousness raising. When you talk with your friends about things that bother you and think there is something wrong with you, they may have the same experiences, and together you can uncover cultural expression. So in genograms, you can find the scripts that you've been given by your culture and your family, and see if they're ones that you want to keep or you would like to create your own. The pleasure domain asks you, how much do you block your pleasure and how much do you let it come through? Pleasure is the measure of wanted success, not desire. Pleasure happens when we feel safe enough, trusting enough, healthy enough. If the idea of talking about sex or making a plan feels unnatural, I acknowledge the reality that talking about sex may deflate spontaneous desire, but it adds to erotic connection between you and a partner. So it's a pleasure domain. So welcome to inclusive sexuality. Educators are inclusive. We affirm sexual rights. Access to sexuality is a human right because it is woven through human experience from womb to tomb and is one of our chief delights. Sex educators honor gender, sexuality, and relationship diversity in sex chats. Medical science has largely ignored the integrative and transformative aspects of sexual experience, but it need not. Recently, all sorts of books have been published, pleasure-oriented, strengths-based, liberatory. So another suggestion is to try bibliotherapy. Discussing sexuality, sex chatting is essential to human development, relationships, autonomy, and personal and political safety. So this is the sexual health model that the World Health Organization recommends with these factors predominant. Sex chatting needs to be done throughout the life course. When parents prescribe abstinence education for their children, just remember at some point they're going to probably be in a nursing home and their children are going to say, no, you can't have sex at your age. It's not proper. So what goes around comes around. And this sex chatting is something that provides love across the life course. So there's always more to discover. Flourishing takes confidence that one can manage and one is entitled to. So thank you very much. I'll take your questions now. And these are just some of the resources I've used in creating my work. And I've highlighted my favorite theorists. Here's some more. And these are my some of my favorite theorists. And if you study this, maybe you'll become one of my favorite theorists. I hope so. So, any questions?
Excellent. Thank you so much, Susan. And to those who are listening live, just know that these slides will be, this presentation is being recorded and will be available to you to refer to after this, so you can see all of these great resources that Susan has shared. We do have a couple questions. One, the first question, kind of going back to the beginning of your discussion and talking about, sexual development. Someone was wanting to know if a child of 4 to 5 years can reach orgasm.
Well, actually, we have documented masturbation within the womb, and some claim that the shudders that happen are orgasm. It's hard to really know, but yes, children can have orgasms.
Thank you. A couple comments just about the challenges that are present in, the generation today. Is that there's a lot of theory over practice in sex education, and a lot of people get information about sexuality from social media. I don't know if you have a comment on that, just maybe about, finding information on social media and what that's, what that does, what that can help or harm.
You can find a lot of great information in social media, and you can find horrendous stuff. So you just need to back up your experience with social media with really looking to sex researchers, sex therapists, sex educators to see what best practices are. And I never use practices that aren't peer reviewed and best practices. And I hope you won't either.
Another comment, there is a disconnect between, and you kind of touched on this at the end too, a disconnect between parent and child education in regards to the sex education that they receive. So I wonder if you just want to comment a little more on that disconnect between the types of sex education that, parents may have received and what children are getting now.
Yes. So one of my favorite books on this topic is by Joyce McFadden, and it's called Your Daughter's Bedroom. I know that was how she published the book first, and she has recently published a second edition. I don't remember the name, but Joyce McFadden. And she's a psychoanalyst who studied, she sent a survey out to over 2,000 women to find out what they were most concerned about in their lives. and why. And she got back unbelievable feedback about how disappointed they were in the relationship they had with their mother, and that they felt that a lot of the reason why they had sort of a distant relationship is that mother, and in this case it was mother and daughter, had not shared their, what they knew about sex, what questions they had. They hadn't looked up stuff together to ascertain what was fact and what wasn't. And actually talking to your child continually about sexuality, like if you're in the grocery store and you pass menstruation products, you can say to your child, do you know what these are for? And then have a little conversation. Or if you pass the condom section, you can say, do you know what these are? And if they say yes, you can say, oh, where did you find out? And you can find out about who they're talking to, et cetera. And so there's so many ways we can have sex chats that become easy. And they're easy when they're frequent, and when we admit, like, hey, I'm sort of embarrassed to talk to you about this, but I noticed that you were watching masturbation pictures or pornography on your computer, and I would like to talk to you about if you think that's what you're seeing is true sex or recreation or fiction or what. And just I guess the phrase is just do it.
Yeah.
It's so important. And the few students I have who have had really positive, open sexual discussions with their parents are so much more relaxed about sexuality. When kids don't know about sex, the only way they can find out, besides looking at porn, is trying it out for themselves. So young people who know little about sex are the first to have sex. And we do feel that it's better for kids to wait to experience outer course before they start intercourse. And so parents can make a big difference in making it so children don't have to experiment to find out what sex is about.
Yeah. And so kind of going off of that, there was a question, at what age can parents start discussing sex with their child?
I started it when my child was a baby. Like when she was first born, you know how baby girls are born and they have a little blood in their mucus. And I said to this child, oh, look, you have lubrication already. You're going to have a great life. And that's just a little blood, and later you'll experience that too. So even though she couldn't understand, it was good for me to just get in the habit of always thinking that sex was an important topic to teach her. And she sort of hated it when she was a teenager. But then when her friends started coming to me and saying, oh, your mom is so cool, she tells me everything, she started appreciating my sex education more.
So we have a few folks on here who are joining us from a few countries in Africa. And so thank you so much for joining us. But the comments are kind of across the board, just noting that sex talk is still taboo in most African communities. And so wonder if you want to comment on just cultural differences and how that can kind of play out in these sort of conversations.
That is such an important question, because trying to be so positive with sex positivity in this talk, I didn't warn you to say, their danger is real. And so you never want to sex chat in an environment in which you will be punished, you will be hurt, you will be stigmatized. And so it's really, sex chatting is to be done with people you trust, who trust you, where you're not going to have repercussions that are harmful. And today, that's in America. I mean, you can't talk about trans experience, et cetera, in many states where, our own state of Missouri is, well, I'm in Florida right now, and people say, how can you go to Florida? And I go, because I'm from Missouri. And it's just such a shame to have such negative sexual cultures that our young people have to grow up in. People who live outside the binaries are persecuted over and all that. So all I can say is I have hope that the pendulum will swing back, and I'm working as hard as I can to make it, and I hope you do too.
Thank you. And then I think the last question I'll ask before I turn it back to Sarah Sims to close us out. There's a question if you have any thoughts on non-monogamy and polyamory. And I'm not sure if I understand this part of the question, but they ask, is it an act of revolution?
Oh, yes, it certainly is. And I think it's actually an orientation. We don't really know what an orientation is, but we know that people experience who they are as an orientation. And many people experience polyamory, which is openly having more than one sexual lover and partner, and caring about them as much as the others. And so there's that. What were the other things that you asked about?
Just
Well,
wanted to know your thoughts about polyamory and non-monogamy.
Well, I personally don't care who other people are sleeping with, unless it's me. And then I might care about something. I'm monogamous, so I luckily am married to a monogamous person. Marriage is not the be and end all of relationships. So I'm so glad that we have a certain amount of freedom to form relationships that fit us better, and that we have communities to live in of people who are of common minds, etc. So I'm totally tolerant of all sexualities that are consensual and as safe as possible.
Thank you so much. All right, Sarah Sims, I'll turn it to you.
Thanks so much, Sarah, and thank you, Dr. Stiritz, for the presentation today. I have just a couple of reminders for everybody and a few things to share. So first, as we've noted a couple of times, this presentation is being recorded, so you'll be able to access that. There's the website as well as a QR code. You can see this recording as well as past ones as well. I also wanted to share, organized by Dr. Stiritz and being offered through the Professional Development Office. We have coming up in April, we have a SAR workshop, which can count towards ASEX certification. So if you are interested in that, I would encourage you to check out this workshop. I'm going to be dropping a link to it in the chat. And then the final announcements are just that we have next month is Black History Month, and we have a 5-part series starting on February 5th. So we hope that you'll join us for those. I'm going to drop the links in the chat real fast before we leave. And then I'll say goodbye to everybody, but I appreciate everybody being here. And my chat is being weird. There are the links for you in the chat. But that's it. Our program is done for today. So thank you everybody for being here, and we will see you next time. Bye.